They didn't just send her unit a death sentence, they sent it in a shipping crate labeled salvage. While the elite divisions paraded their pristine billion-dollar AI machines, humanity's last line of defense was handed a rusted, headless drone. That was their first mistake. Her name was Samantha Collins. The cargo transport kicked up a violent storm of red silicate dust as it touched down on the cracked tarmac of Forward Operating Base Tartarus. The base, perched on the hostile frontier of the Kepler 186F campaign, was considered the armpit of the Terran Expeditionary Forces. It was where careers went to die, and where soldiers were sent to be forgotten. Chief Warrant Officer Samantha Collins stood on the landing pad, her coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and synthetic grease, squinting through the abrasive wind. She had been promised heavy armor. She had been promised a fighting chance against the native coalition forces that had been systematically wiping out Terran outposts for the past 6 months. Instead, the transport's ramp lowered with a rusted groan, and a pair of automated loaders unceremoniously dumped a single, dented titanium shipping crate onto the dust. Samantha walked up to the crate, wiping a smudge of oil from her forehead. The stenciled lettering on the side read, "Property of Lockheed Boeing Defense Systems. Model XM-44. Status: decommissioned. Salvage." "You've got to be kidding me," muttered Lieutenant Dillian Holmes, stepping up beside her. He was the squadron's lead pilot, a man whose reflexes were legend, currently grounded because his previous mech had been turned into slag 3 weeks prior. "Tell me, Command didn't just ship us a graveyard relic." Samantha unsealed the latches with a heavy hydro spanner. The pressurized hiss of the crate opening sounded like a dying gasp. As the front panel fell away, the harsh Kepler sun illuminated the mechanical corpse inside. It was an XM-44 Revenant chassis. Once the pride of the mid-21 St. Century infantry support line, it was now little more than a metallic skeleton. Its primary optical sensor array, the head was completely sheared off, leaving frayed fiber optic cables dangling like severed nerves. The left actuator arm was missing below the elbow, and the carbon scoring across its chest plate indicated it had already failed its previous operators spectacularly. "They didn't just ship us a relic, Holmes," Samantha said, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. "They shipped us an insult." Behind them, the polished boots of Major General Harrison Caldwell crunched against the gravel. Caldwell was a man who looked thoroughly out of place on a combat frontier. His uniform was immaculate, and his chest was heavy with medals earned in air-conditioned command centers back on Earth, primarily through lucrative contracts with DARPA and General Dynamics. "Ah, Warrant Officer Collins," Caldwell said, his tone dripping with corporate condescension. "I see your requisition has arrived." Samantha turned, her jaw set tight. "With all due respect, General, I requisitioned 2 Aegis, 7 autonomous combat platforms. What you delivered is a 40-year-old paperweight. The actuating servos on this thing are stripped, the AI core is gutted, and it doesn't even have a functioning fusion battery. We are holding the most exposed flank on the entire continent, and you just gave us garbage." Caldwell smiled, a thin, patronizing expression. "The Aegis 7 platforms are state-of-the-art, Warrant Officer. They rely on the new hyperlinked neural network. They are reserved for the 1st and 3rd Elite Divisions holding the primary extraction zones. FOB Tartarus is a secondary perimeter. You are expected to make do with legacy equipment. It's a cost-benefit analysis. I'm sure a mechanic of your reputation can get this scrap moving enough to act as a distraction if the enemy breaches." A distraction. That was all Tartarus was to high command. Meat and rusted metal to slow the enemy down while the brass evacuated the rare earth minerals from the primary zones. "This chassis doesn't even have a brain, General," Holmes interjected, his fists clenching. "You can't pilot an XM-44 manually without a neural sync bridge, and those were outlawed 20 years ago for causing cranial hemorrhaging. How are we supposed to fire its weapons?" "Wishful thinking?" "That sounds like an engineering problem, Lieutenant," Caldwell replied, turning on his heel. "I expect that drone to be operational for perimeter patrol by 0800 tomorrow. Do not disappoint me." As the General's transport lifted off, washing them in another wave of red dust, Samantha stared at the broken machine. Holmes sighed, kicking the discarded crate. "We're dead, Sam. The enemy's vanguard units have energy shielding and plasma lances. This thing has a rusted chassis and a missing arm. We might as well start digging our own graves." Samantha didn't answer right away. She climbed into the crate and ran her bare hand over the exposed internal wiring of the XM-44. She felt the heavy, dense armor plating, cold-rolled, depleted uranium and titanium alloy. The modern Aegis 7 mechs were sleek, agile, and relied entirely on energy shields and autonomous AI to survive. They were built like sports cars. But this XM-44? It was built like a vault. "Dillion," she said quietly, tracing a charred power conduit. "Do you know why they decommissioned the Revenant line?" "Because they were slow, and the AI was rudimentary," Holmes said, crossing his arms. "No," Samantha corrected, a dark spark lighting up in her eyes. "They decommissioned them because the power-to-weight ratio was considered uncontrollable. The military wanted machines that could follow strict algorithms. The XM-44 was designed before the Geneva AI Accords. It has no software limiters, no ethical safety subroutines, no governor on its kinetic output. If you push this thing past its red line, it would rip itself apart to complete a kill." Holmes frowned, stepping closer. "But the AI core is gone. It's a hollow shell." "Exactly," Samantha said, a grim smile finally breaking across her face. "Command thinks they gave us a broken toy because it lacks a brain, but without an AI forcing it to play by the rules. There is nothing stopping us from turning it into a monster." She hopped down from the crate, tossing the hydrospanner into her toolbox. "Holmes, go to the quartermaster. Bribe him, threaten him, I don't care. I need 30 meters of hyperconductive copper wiring, a cooling manifold from a downed Pratt & Whitney dropship, and a Caterpillar industrial mining drill." Holmes's eyes went wide. "A mining drill? Sam, what the hell are you going to do?" "I'm going to build a gravedigger," she said, "and you're going to pilot it." The hangar bay of Fob Tartarus became a quarantine zone of sparks, grinding metal, and the stench of ozone. For 72 straight hours, Samantha Collins did not sleep. She lived on black coffee, chemical stimulants, and pure, unadulterated spite. The military manual for the XM-44 drone dictated a rigid, methodical repair schedule utilizing officially sanctioned Lockheed Boeing parts. Samantha threw the manual into the incinerator. What followed was an act of mechanical heresy. To replace the missing fusion battery, she didn't request a military-grade power cell. Instead, she cannibalized a commercial General Electric microreactor salvaged from a civilian terraforming station that had been abandoned miles away. The reactor was dangerously unstable, outputting triple the voltage the XM-44 was originally rated for. To prevent the drone from melting from the inside out, she bypassed the internal cooling system, running exposed liquid nitrogen tubing directly over the central processing spine, leaving the machine constantly weeping frozen vapor. The missing left arm was where Samantha's genius took a dark turn. Lacking a replacement manipulator hand, she took the Caterpillar industrial mining drill Holmes had procured. Originally designed to bore through solid granite, the drill head was a terrifying cone of tungsten carbide teeth. She hard-welded it directly to the drone's left elbow joint, rerouting the power grid so the massive drill could rev up to 5,000 revolutions per minute in less than a second. But the hardest part, the part that would either save them or get them both court-martialed and executed, was the control system. Holmes sat in a folding chair, looking at the crude, horrific helmet Samantha had wired together. It was an old aviator's rig, but the inside was lined with dozens of invasive biometric needles. "The modern mechs use a Wi-Fi neural network," Samantha explained, her hands stained black with grease. "The AI does the heavy lifting, and the pilot just gives tactical suggestions from a mile away. But this machine has no AI, no optical sensors. It's blind." "So how do I see?" Holmes asked, swallowing hard as he stared at the helmet. "You don't," Samantha said. "Not with cameras. I'm bypassing the visual cortex entirely. I've hardwired the drone's tactile sensors, gyroscopes, and audio receivers directly into this helmet. When you put this on, you aren't remote controlling the drone, Dillion. You are the drone. You will feel the dirt under its treads. You will feel the wind against its armor. The delay between your thought and its movement will be zero." "Sam," Holmes said softly, "direct neural sync. This is the Frankenstein protocol. This is why pilots went insane in the 2030s. The human brain isn't meant to process the sensory input of a 10-ton block of metal. I know, Samantha said, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was asking. I've installed dampeners, but it's still going to feel like your skull is splitting open. If you don't want to do this, I can try to code a basic auto turret script. But it'll just be target practice for the enemy. Holmes looked out the hangar doors. In the distance, the sky was flashing with the ominous purple lightning of orbital bombardments. The enemy was getting closer. The perimeter alarms had been whining for days. He looked back at the monstrous amalgamation of rusted military armor, exposed civilian wiring, and brutal industrial hardware. "Strap me in," Holmes said. They began the testing at midnight, far from the prying eyes of the base's chain of command. The first time Samantha engaged the GE reactor, the gravedigger let out a sound that chilled the blood of everyone in the hangar. It wasn't the smooth, humming purr of a modern Aegis 7. It was a guttural, throaty roar of raw combustion and overloaded turbines, like a chained beast being shocked into consciousness. Holmes slammed the helmet onto his head, the bioneedles engaged, sinking into the neural ports at the base of his skull. He screamed. His body convulsed in the control chair as a tidal wave of raw data flooded his synapses. Samantha hovered over the kill switch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dillian, compartmentalize. Don't look at the whole picture. Focus on the limbs. Feel the weight. In the center of the hangar, the 10-ton gravedigger twitched. Its massive, headless shoulders rolled. Without a camera for a head, the flat, armored stump where its neck used to be simply tracked back and forth. Holmes stopped screaming. He opened his eyes, though his pupils were dilated entirely black. Blood trickled from his left nostril. I can feel the concrete, Holmes whispered. His voice was hoarse. In the hangar, the gravedigger lifted its right leg, a massive pylon of steel, and brought it down. The concrete floor shattered beneath the impact, sending spiderweb cracks 30 feet in every direction. "The drill," Samantha commanded over the comms. Holmes twitched his left arm. On the drone, the massive Caterpillar mining drill spun to life with a deafening screech, throwing a shower of sparks as it scraped the floor. The torque was so violently powerful that the drone had to lean its massive weight back just to counter the centrifugal force. "Good," Samantha breathed, taking her hand off the kill switch. "We have a fighting chance." Their secret remained hidden until the morning of the 5th day. Major General Caldwell made an unannounced inspection of the perimeter. When he walked into Hangar 4 and saw the monstrosity leaking freezing vapor, covered in weld scars, and sporting an illegal industrial drill, his face turned the color of ash. "What in the name of God is this abomination?" Caldwell demanded, flanked by 2 armed military police. "Warrant Officer Collins! I gave you an XM-44 drone, and you have mutilated it into a scrapyard terror. This breaks 14 separate codes of military conduct." "It works, General," Samantha said, stepping between Caldwell and her machine, clutching a heavy wrench. "It has 10 times the kinetic output of your Aegis. 7S. "It's a liability," Caldwell shouted, pointing a gloved finger at the beast. "It's completely off-network. It doesn't connect to the tactical grid, it has no remote override, and it possesses unauthorized civilian modifications. This is court-martial material, Collins. Guards, arrest her and dismantle that piece of trash." Before the MPs could take a step forward, the base's master alarm klaxon shattered the morning air. It wasn't the standard perimeter warning, it was the deep, bass-heavy wail of an absolute breach. A communications officer sprinted into the hangar, his face pale. "General Caldwell! Sir! It's an ambush!" The enemy bypassed the outer mountains. They're hitting the primary extraction zones and FOB Tartarus simultaneously. "Deploy the Aegis. 7S, Caldwell barked, instantly forgetting Samantha. "Let our state-of-the-art tech earn its paycheck. Put them on autonomous seek and destroy." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, we can't." The enemy deployed a localized EMP and a hyper-frequency logic bomb. It's an electronic warfare attack like we've never seen. The Aegis 7 network is infected. Caldwell froze. "What do you mean, infected?" "The autonomous AI. They're dead in the water, sir. Their safety subroutines are locked. They are standing perfectly still on the battlefield. $3 billion of hardware, and the software is refusing to fire. The enemy vanguard is tearing through them. They'll be at our gates in 4 minutes." Caldwell's immaculate facade crumbled. The flawless, perfectly engineered shield of humanity was failing because it was too smart, too connected, and entirely dependent on lines of code that the enemy had easily hijacked. Samantha Collins turned her wrench in her hand, the heavy steel cold and comforting. She looked at Caldwell, her eyes hard and merciless. "General," she said softly over the wailing alarms, "they hacked your network. They shut down your AI. But they can't hack a rusty gear, and they can't hack human spite." She turned back to Holmes, who was already strapped into his chair, blood steadily dripping from his nose as he clamped the neural helmet down. "Holmes!" Samantha yelled over the chaos. "Wake up the gravedigger!" In the shadows of the hangar, the GE fusion reactor ignited with a deafening, demonic roar. The battlefield outside Fob Tartarus was a slaughterhouse. The sky, thick with churning gray clouds of smoke, was pierced by the blinding blue streaks of enemy plasma lances. The Alien Coalition, a brutal, highly coordinated force of bipedal shock troops wrapped in bioluminescent energy shields, advanced with terrifying precision. They moved in perfect synchronization, sweeping through the Terran trenches. Scattered across the killing field stood the pride of the Terran military. 20 pristine, heavily armed Aegis, 7 autonomous mechs. They were masterpieces of modern engineering, yet they stood completely paralyzed. The enemy's logic bomb had initiated a catastrophic loop in their ethical targeting subroutines. Some were locked in a diagnostic reboot, others were simply standing idle, their optical sensors flashing a bright, helpless yellow while alien plasma melted through their pristine armor like hot knives through butter. Terran infantry, severely outgunned and lacking armored support, were dying in the mud. Desperate radio chatter flooded the comms, a chaotic symphony of screaming medics and broken defensive lines. General Caldwell stood in the reinforced command bunker, his hands trembling as he watched the tactical monitors turn from green to crimson. The base was lost. His career, his life, everything was dissolving into ash because he had trusted a billion-dollar algorithm over the gritty reality of war. Then, the bunker shook. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rhythmic, seismic thud. Boom, boom, boom. On the security feed, the heavy titanium blast doors of Hangar 4 blew outward, not elegantly opened by command, but violently kicked off their tracks by a 10-ton mass of rusted steel. The gravedigger stepped out into the blinding light of the apocalypse. It looked less like a military vehicle and more like a nightmare forged in a scrapyard. Exposed, hyperconductive copper veins pulsed with blinding white heat. Liquid nitrogen vapor poured off its spine in thick, hissing clouds. Without a head, its silhouette was hulking, broad-shouldered, and inherently brutal. In the command center, Caldwell stared in horror and awe. What is it doing? It doesn't have an optical uplink. It's blind. Deep inside the base, strapped into his chair, Dillian Holmes's eyes were rolled back in his head. The sensory overload was excruciating, but it was also pure. He couldn't see the battlefield with a camera, but he could feel it. The atmospheric pressure changes told him where the plasma blasts were coming from. The micro vibrations in the ground painted a perfect, high-resolution sonar map of every enemy footstep within a 2-mile radius. He wasn't processing ones and zeros. He was operating on primal, predatory instinct. On the battlefield, a squad of 6 alien shock troopers turned their weapons away from the dying infantry and aimed at the lumbering monstrosity. They fired in unison. 6 bolts of superheated plasma struck the gravedigger's chest plate. Modern mechs would have relied on energy shields, which would have overloaded. But the gravedigger had no shields. It only had 40-year-old, cold-rolled, depleted uranium. The plasma scorched the metal, turning the rust a glowing cherry red. But the sheer density of the archaic armor simply absorbed the thermal shock. Inside his helmet, Holmes felt a burning sensation across his chest. A phantom pain transferred through the neural link. He grit his teeth, letting out a feral snarl. The gravedigger didn't flinch. It didn't pause to run a tactical threat assessment. It didn't calculate the optimal firing angle. It just lunged. The sheer acceleration of the overloaded GE fusion reactor defied physics. A 10-ton machine moved with the explosive violence of a striking viper. It closed the distance of 50 yards in less than 3 seconds, the ground cratering beneath its massive steel feet. The alien squad barely had time to register the movement before the gravedigger was upon them. Holmes swung his left arm. On the drone, the Caterpillar mining drill screamed to 5,000 revolutions per minute. It slammed into the lead alien soldier's energy shield. Advanced energy shields were designed to deflect high-velocity projectiles and dissipate laser fire. They were not designed to withstand the sustained, grinding kinetic friction of a tungsten carbide drill meant to bore through planetary bedrock. The shield shattered like glass in less than a second. The drill tore through the alien's kinetic armor, ripping it apart in a horrific shower of blue blood and shrieking metal. The gravedigger didn't stop. Holmes stepped into the carnage, using the momentum to pivot the massive chassis. The drone's right arm, a thick pylon of reinforced titanium, swung in a devastating backhand arc. It struck two more aliens, the brute force impact, launching their broken bodies through the air like ragdolls, crushing them instantly against the concrete barrier of the trench. Total silence fell over that sector of the battlefield. The surviving alien troops, bred for disciplined, calculated combat against predictable AI, hesitated. They had never seen a machine fight with such chaotic, hateful malice. It moved like a wounded animal backed into a corner. "They're adapting!" Samantha yelled into the comms, watching from a reinforced bunker slit. "They're falling back to set up heavy anti-armor cannons." "Holmes, do not let them establish a firing line." "I feel them," Holmes thought, the neural link translating his intention into raw mechanical fury. The gravedigger charged into the thickest concentration of the alien vanguard. The enemy attempted to deploy their electronic warfare logic bomb against it, sending massive spikes of corruptive data into the airwaves. It was utterly useless. The gravedigger had no receiver, no Wi-Fi, no sophisticated processing core to hack. Trying to hack it was like trying to hack a sledgehammer. It was a bloodbath of steel and dirt. Holmes pushed the machine past every recommended safety limit. When an alien heavy gunner managed to blow out the drone's left knee actuator with a rail slug, Holmes didn't retreat. A modern mech would have registered the critical damage and automatically initiated a safe shutdown to prevent permanent destruction. Holmes, feeling the searing phantom pain in his own leg, simply locked the ruined joint in place, dragging the heavy steel limb behind him as he continued the slaughter, turning the limp into a terrifying, rhythmic lurch. He fired the shoulder-mounted legacy munitions dumbfire rockets that couldn't be electronically jammed. They detonated at point-blank range, the concussive force blowing both enemy and Terran debris into the sky. The gravedigger waded through the fire, its chassis weeping liquid nitrogen, its tungsten drill painted in alien blood, its rusted armor glowing with heat. From the command center, General Caldwell watched the impossible unfold. The high-tech, invincible alien coalition was breaking. Their disciplined lines were collapsing into a panicked rout. They weren't retreating tactically. They were fleeing in absolute terror from a headless, broken scrap heap that refused to die. "My God," a tactical officer whispered. "It's not fighting a battle. It's executing them." Samantha Collins leaned against the concrete wall of her bunker, a grim, exhausted smile touching her lips. Humanity had forgotten what war actually was. They had tried to sterilize it with algorithms and clean, remote-controlled drones. But war wasn't clean. It was mud, blood, rust, and the terrifying, indomitable will of a human pushed to the absolute edge. They gave her a broken drone, and she had given them a monster, and the monster was winning. The battlefield was no longer a tactical engagement. It was an execution ground. The alien coalition's vanguard. Previously, an unstoppable tide of synchronized destruction was fracturing under the relentless, chaotic assault of a machine that simply refused to adhere to the mathematical probabilities of war. Inside Hangar 4, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Chief Warrant Officer Samantha Collins stood over Dillian Holmes, her hands hovering nervously over the neural sync console. The medical readouts were flashing a catastrophic crimson. Holmes was violently convulsing in the command chair. His breathing was ragged, sounding like torn canvas, and dark arterial blood was leaking not just from his nose, but from his tear ducts. The Frankenstein protocol was doing exactly what the medical journals had predicted in the 2030s. The human brain was never designed to process the sensory input of a 10-ton kinetic brawler. The feedback loop was literally cooking his cerebral cortex. "Dillian, you have to pull back!" Samantha shouted, her voice cracking as she watched the drone's telemetry. The General Electric micro-reactor was operating at 310% capacity. The liquid nitrogen cooling lines had completely boiled off, and the XM-44's internal temperature was approaching the melting point of its own chassis. "The Vanguard is broken! The perimeter is secure. Let the infantry mop up the rest. No, Holmes grunted, his voice a distorted, localized growl transmitted through the heavy comms. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair so hard his knuckles were white, the biometric needles digging deeper into his neck. I can feel something else. Something massive. The ground is shaking. On the tactical monitors in the main command bunker, Major General Harrison Caldwell watched the radar pulse with a new, terrifying signature. The coalition wasn't just retreating, they were clearing a path. The heavy, suffocating smoke of the battlefield parted. Emerging from the smog was a Kalen siege dreadnought. It was a walking fortress, a quadrupedal leviathan wrapped in overlapping, iridescent energy shields. It dwarfed the Aegis, 7 mechs, and made the Gravedigger look like a child's toy. Mounted on its broad, armored back was a twin-linked plasma siege cannon, a weapon designed to crack orbital bunkers and vaporize dropships. It reminded Samantha of the early 21st century autonomous warfare doctrines pioneered by private sector visionaries like Palmer Luckey at Anduril Industries. Raw, asymmetric, and terrifyingly pragmatic. The coalition didn't build the dreadnought to fight infantry. They built it to erase coordinates from a map. The dreadnought locked its targeting lasers onto FOB Tartarus. If it fired, the command bunker, the hangar, and the 300 wounded soldiers inside the medical ward would be turned to glass. "General Caldwell!" a tactical officer screamed. "Siege cannon is charging! Impact in 40 seconds!" Caldwell stood paralyzed. His pristine Aegis, 7 drones, were still locked in a defensive reboot loop. The multi-billion-dollar military-industrial complex had failed him. We have to evacuate," he stammered, abandoning his post and backing toward the blast doors. "Call the orbital transports." "There's no time for transports!" Samantha's voice ripped through the base-wide comms laced with venom. "Holmes, you have to stop that dreadnought!" On the battlefield, the Gravedigger stood amidst the burning wreckage of the Vanguard. Its rusted, depleted uranium armor was glowing a dull, angry orange. Its left knee was entirely fused, and the tungsten carbide teeth of the caterpillar drill were chipped and smoking. Holmes forced his eyes open. His vision was blurring, swimming in a sea of red agony, but through the neural link he felt the heavy, rhythmic stomping of the Kalen dreadnought. He felt the electromagnetic buildup of its siege cannons pulling the iron out of the very dirt beneath his treads. "Reactor," Holmes wheezed. "Give me everything." "Dillion, if I drop the final inhibitor on the GE reactor, it will go critical," Samantha warned, her fingers trembling over the manual override switch. "You'll have less than 2 minutes before the core melts down and detonates. And the feedback, the pain will kill you before the blast does." "Do it." Samantha slammed her palm onto the override. In the center of the battlefield, the Gravedigger let out a sound that defied mechanical description. It was a shrieking metallic wail as the commercial reactor dumped unmitigated, unfiltered nuclear energy directly into the drone's archaic servos. The heavy titanium chest plate cracked under the pressure, venting a blinding column of white-hot radioactive plasma into the sky. The Gravedigger didn't run. It launched itself. The dreadnought fired. 2 blinding beams of superheated plasma tore across the killing field. A modern Aegis, 7 would have tried to sidestep. Holmes, operating purely on suicidal instinct, threw the Gravedigger's immense weight directly into the blast. The plasma struck the drone's right shoulder. The impact was apocalyptic. The Gravedigger's entire right arm, the heavy titanium pylon, was instantly vaporized, sheared off in a shower of molten slag. In the hangar, Holmes screamed a raw, agonizing sound of pure torture as his brain registered the phantom amputation. His body convulsed violently, the biometric harness straining to hold him in the chair, but the machine did not fall. Using the sheer kinetic momentum of the blast to spin its chassis, the Gravedigger closed the final 30 yards in a blinding blur of rusted metal and venting fire. The Gravedigger slammed into the Kalen dreadnought like a meteor. The impact alone sent a shockwave across the cratered Earth, shattering the acoustic sensors of every remaining combatant. The Kalen energy shields flared violently, trying to repel the 10-ton mass of superheated Terran steel. But the Gravedigger was already inside the shield's perimeter. Holmes, blind, dying, and operating on the last frayed synapses of his consciousness, raised his remaining arm. The Caterpillar industrial drill ignited, powered by a redlining nuclear reactor. The tungsten teeth spun at a catastrophic 12,000 revolutions per minute. Holmes drove the massive weapon directly into the dreadnought's central chassis, right below the mounting bracket of its siege cannons. The sound of the drill biting into alien armor was a deafening metallic shriek. Sparks erupted in a 30-foot geyser. The dreadnought thrashed violently, its heavy quadrupedal legs stomping the ground, trying to dislodge the burning parasite attached to its chest. It fired its secondary defense lasers, melting thick layers of armor off the gravedigger's back. In the hangar, Holmes's heart rate monitor flatlined for 2 seconds, then spiked into a lethal tachycardia. Blood poured down his chin. "It's not breaking," Holmes choked out. "The armor is too thick. Sam, I can't pierce the core." Samantha stared at the telemetry. The GE reactor was at 400%. The containment field was failing. The gravedigger was literally seconds away from a thermonuclear meltdown. Then she realized the terrible truth. Command had told them the XM-44 was brainless. But as she watched the code cascade across her screen, a hidden, deeply buried subroutine flared to life in the drone's archaic operating system. It wasn't a tactical algorithm. It wasn't an ethical combat limiter. It was a primitive, hard-coded prime directive from 40 years ago. Protect the operator. Protect the base. The drone wasn't just receiving Holmes's commands. It was reflecting his sheer, unadulterated willpower back into the neural link, holding the pilot's fracturing mind together by force. "Dillion, listen to me!" Samantha screamed, tears cutting through the grease on her face. "The drill isn't the weapon anymore. The reactor is. You have to let go." "If I sever the link, the drone powers down." "Not if I lock the servos." Samantha's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing 40 years of obsolete security protocols. "I can fuse the drill's motor into a continuous loop and deadbolt the knee actuators. It will hold the dreadnought in place. But you have to eject from the sink now, or the EMP from the detonation will fry your brainstem." On the battlefield, the dreadnought stumbled backward, screaming in mechanical agony as the red-hot tungsten drill finally pierced its inner hull. The gravedigger was a horrifying sight, missing an arm, melting from the inside out, bathed in alien blood and its own radioactive fire. "Lock it down, Sam," Holmes whispered, a bloody, exhausted smile crossing his face. Samantha hit the execution command. Servo lock engaged. Neural bridge severing in 3, 2, 1. With a brutal mechanical clack, the biometric needles violently retracted from Holmes's neck. He slumped forward in the command chair, unconscious, his body finally free from the crushing weight of the machine. Out on the killing field, the gravedigger stood alone. It was no longer a piloted drone. It was a bomb with a death grip. The Kalen dreadnought frantically tried to back away, its massive legs tearing up trenches. But the gravedigger's fused joints and the deeply embedded drill anchored it permanently to the alien Leviathan. Deep within the chest cavity of the rusted XM-44, the General Electric commercial microreactor finally breached containment. For a fraction of a second, all sound ceased. The battlefield was bathed in absolute, blinding silence. Then, a miniature sun ignited. The thermonuclear blast vaporized the gravedigger and the Kalen dreadnought instantly. A shockwave of pure, expanding kinetic force swept across the valley, flattening Kalen infantry, shattering the remaining alien gunships, and throwing a massive wall of silicate dust thousands of feet into the atmosphere. The electromagnetic pulse shorted out every piece of coalition technology within 10 miles, dropping their bioluminescent shields and sending their surviving forces into absolute, blinded panic. When the dust finally settled, Fob Tartarus was still standing. The Aegis 7 mechs, fried by the EMP, stood like useless statues in the dirt, but the alien vanguard was utterly annihilated. Only a massive, glassed crater remained where humanity's rusted monster had held the line. Inside the command bunker, Major General Harrison Caldwell fell to his knees, his immaculate uniform covered in dust from the ceiling. He stared at the tactical screen, completely speechless. The multi-billion-dollar doctrine of safe, sterile, algorithm-driven war had failed. Humanity had been saved by scrap metal, an unauthorized reactor, and the terrifying madness of a human pilot willing to bleed. In Hangar 4, Samantha Collins collapsed beside Dillion Holmes' chair. She checked his pulse. It was faint, erratic, but it was there. He was alive. They didn't just survive, they changed the face of Terran warfare forever. The brass would try to cover it up, of course. They would try to hide the fact that a 40-year-old, headless, broken drone had outperformed their pristine, mechanical army. But the infantry saw it. The grunts in the mud saw the gravedigger. They saw the monster that saved them. And the galaxy would never underestimate human engineering or human spite ever again. Are you ready for more mind-blowing sci-fi HFY stories? If the chaotic brilliance of the gravedigger and humanity's unyielding spirit kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your fellow sci-fi lovers, and subscribe to our channel for weekly epic tales. Let us know in the comments what kind of battlefield monster you would build. Don't miss out on the next adventure. Join our community today.
Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, they gave her a broken drone, turned it into a battlefield monster that changed sci-fi stories. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the sense of determination and creativity. There's something satisfying about watching someone take what others have written off as useless and turn it into something remarkable. The underdog spirit is one of the reasons HFY stories are so enjoyable. One gentle lesson I took from this story is that limitations don't always have to define the outcome. Sometimes progress starts with making the best of what we already have and refusing to give up on an idea too soon. Have you ever seen potential in something that everyone else overlooked? And what moment in the story surprised you the most? Thank you for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story sparked your imagination or gave you something to think about, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and maybe like or subscribe for more HFI stories and sci-fi adventures.